Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the McConaughey at YouTube with another model video. Today we'll be reviewing and doing a tutorial on Mr. Surfacer 1200. It is a primer surfacer, works very well on primer and styrene. Other things like etch and multimedia kits will need the assistance of an etch or fully fledged primer. I prefer this product over Tamiya primer and other brands on resin. It has a tendency of sticking to clean wash resin very well. You'll notice on the market that you have a range of surfaces in colours, mostly grey, from 500, 1000, 1200 and 1500. These numbers indicate the thickness or the consistency of the microfiller and how thick it is, much like sandpaper. 500 is very thick, virtually for hand painting or spraying on scratch built models or something that you've used very heavy sandpapers on to fill those gaps. The smoother one at 1500 virtually has no microfiller. This one has a little bit. It is mostly for airbrushing, can be used for hand painting, but I would stop that at 1000, which is in the middle of the line. We'll demonstrate the use on some resin parts and see how we get even coverage, as well as the effective way of thinning it and adding it into your airbrush. If you wish to hand paint it, check out the hand painting lacquer paint tutorial. It's a case of mixing it with equal parts thinner or a little more thinner in a separate jar, applying it on so it looks quite thin or translucent. Allow each layer to dry and apply another layer to prevent brush strokes. If it's see-through, it's correct. If it's streaky, it's too thick. First step is, I've placed a large metal stainless steel ball bearing in it. You can mix it or stir it with a stick or an electric stirrer. I find little ball bearing to be ideal. Making it in batches is perfect, where you mix 50-50 with lacquer thinner and this, and just pour it straight into the airbrush, or you can mix as you go. Mix externally from the airbrush as to prevent clogging, as the microfiller sits at the very bottom and the thinner sits at the very top. So after a very good shake, just as explained in the scene just before, I like to always pour up against the pole. Does the trick. Go into a nice mixing shot glass. These things are absolutely great. Fill it with equal part thinner. Mix it very thoroughly before it dissolves through the shot glass base. And we pour the whole contents in. Do a bit of a test. Sprays like a dream. So respraying styrene, going in very thin light coats. It applies nicely. If you're hand painting, it'll probably be almost just as fine. And it's virtually dry to the touch in between each coat. And I can still see some fine scratches, so we'll probably go through a few more. Now if you have like a really deep scratch, a scratch with a knife, a tool, a gouge mark, microfiller will never fill that. It's virtually stuff from files or sandpaper that's greater than about your 300 grit wet. It'll handle that, so it's not so much visible, but it's more so. And that's an example of a wet coat. The first one was a dry coat. It's more so to go from a slightly rough surface to a nice glossy smooth surface, and you can see that there is a bit of a gloss build up and it's shining back a bit. Still a few raised bits and whatnot, but a little bit of 2000 sandpaper will fix that easily. And for something as roughed up and scratch built as this, I'll probably use a higher grit, 1000 or 500. But this has already gone through a few layers and it's its final coats. It's coming out quite nicely. And this is the finished look. There is a couple of pit marks right there. It picks that up. Everything else is just smoothly covered and ready for a polish and a paint. It's going to be done in matte, so the polish is not welcomed. I fixed that. The part is completely ready for painting. And this is the idea of follow-up priming, and the idea that this is a nice middle ground product. So normally if you're just surfacing for prepping a surface to paint and it's perfect, 1 or 2 dry coats. When we're dealing and activating the full quantities of the micro filler, that's when we do 2-3 wet coats. We saw it apply straight to a polished styrene piece after putty work. With resin, I always like to go with a dry coat first. It orange peels ever so slightly and it gives it a bit of teeth for the paint to grip on nicely. And once that's on all good and fine, at a decent PSI, we go for our first wet coat. And that's when we're applying the paint. It's still glossy, it's on there nice and wet. It's covered well. I don't see any scratches, holes, anything. All the follow-up putty work has come quite well. So this has been a successfully clean piece in its second pass. Still, for the case of polishing and having an ideal surface after a scratch built item, which this thing is, and then created into a garage kit, we go for our second and our third wet coat, and any tiny air bubbles, scratches, marks will cover up seamlessly. Afterwards we'll polish it with 1-2000 grit sandpaper and it's ready for painting straight away. Once you're done, you pour the primer back into the pot, wipe it out, clean it out. It's slow to dry, so you can do a very, very long spraying session. And it's a very good all-round product if you do your multi-media stuff, resin, styrene, whatnot, and you have something on hand for metal, such as your Mr. Metal Primer or an etch primer for other bits and pieces. If you're a wargaming person and you mostly do pewter stuff, look for a completely different product. And this is the finished results. Mr. Surfacer works very, very well. We've got our styrene pieces, and after an hour it's a bit scratch resistant, it can be touched, and with about 3 to 4 wet coats it goes on very smooth, bit of a buff, and you're ready for gloss painting on the resin. And again, it's about an hour ago. It's dry to the touch, though it'll take longer to mature as it's a bit harder to grip on. 2 to 3 wet coats, very, very glossy. If you're just biting for paint, a couple of dry coats or 1 wet coat, and that's it. My recommendation while spraying, around 11 to 15 psi. Preferably try to use an airbrush with a 0.5mm needle and nozzle. It will have a wider spray pattern, but if you pull the needle back shallow, in the shallow fashion, you should have no problems avoiding overspray and covering all your pieces. It's also a lot easier to do your dry coats and your wet coats, as you can pull all the way back and clean your airbrush far quicker. Point 3 should do okay if it's well maintained, cleaned, and you check your nozzle for any debris, lint or garbage. All of those notes are set aside. If you're putting it through point 3, maybe consider a little retardant. And that's all you need to know. Very, very easy to use. There is no excuse why you should not prime with an airbrush. Maybe you get a cheaper Hyoscine and just use that as your primer top coat piece. But with practice and over time, it's a lot cheaper. It's not as quick as a rattle can, but boy is it a lot cheaper. And as time goes on, you'll find the control is really worthwhile. You'll have plenty of stock to spray. You won't run out as easily. It's easy to buy. And yeah, just can't complain whatsoever. Thank you very much for watching. As always, until next time, stay tuned for further content. We've got a Facebook. We upload videos once to twice a week. Check the description section for more references, links, sources, information, that sort of thing. Videos are also uploaded to Facebook under the McConaughey, work in progresses, all that other stuff, and stay tuned for more tutorials. Happy to answer questions in the comment section and other places that I have a presence, and willing to listen to recommendations for more product reviews. Catch you guys next time.